In grammar, tense is a category that expresses time reference. The past tense, for instance, places an action or situation before the moment of speaking. If I say, for example, Zai went to the store, I'm simply telling you that the action happened sometime before the present. But language lets us be much more precise than that. Suppose instead I say Zai had gone to the store before Arglin arrived. Now, we're no longer talking about a singular event, but two events, out of which one is temporally prior to the other, and both take place in a time before the moment of speaking. This is called the past perfect, or more formally, the pluperfect tense. Many people visualize this as the past of the past or pastception, but it doesn't quite paint the full picture. You see, the implied present is not necessarily the absolute present. For example, suppose these aren't my words at all. Instead, Carrie said it, and now I'm merely reporting what Carrie said. Suddenly, the sentence has its own internal present, the point from which Carrie was speaking, which is no longer the actual present. So, if you simply shift that same reference point into the past a little bit, you have this sort of structure. Now, what if I convert this direct speech to reported speech? If you use the standard grammatical procedure, you would get this. Seems about right? But if you look a little closer, something rather curious has happened. The sentence contains two past reference points, Carrie said and before Arglin arrived. Yet, the grammar never tells us about how those two moments relate to each other. Did Arglin arrive before Carrie spoke or afterward? Both interpretations are perfectly compatible with the sentence. English leaves that relationship entirely to context clues. In other words, once we begin nesting temporal reference points, English eventually stops keeping track of which past belongs to which layer. It simply reuses the same pluperfect over and over again. For human beings, this isn't a problem. We can usually pick up on context clues and understand the underlying connotation in a sentence, but it's inexact. Sure, practically it makes little to no difference, but logically it feels off. Let's imagine, just for the next few minutes, that we're designing a language from scratch. A language that focuses not on practicality, but on precision, mathematical precision. Then, instead of allowing context to decide which temporal layer we're referring to, every additional layer of pastness will receive its own explicit grammatical marker. To do that, we first need to stop thinking of the past tense as merely a verb form. Linguists use the symbol PSD as a glossing abbreviation to denote a past form. I'm going to be using it in a completely unintended way, as an operator. The PSD operator shifts our temporal reference point one step into the past. So, for example, PSD squared of go is equivalent to had gone. Using this notation, the sentence we struggled with earlier can be written like so. In this way, we can even specify each of the previously ambiguous cases with precision. So, if PSD squared refers to pluperfect, what does PSD cubed refer to? Can we name it? Well, for that, we'll need to look at some etymology. The name pluperfect traces back through Middle English and to the Latin phrase plus quam perfectum, literally meaning more than perfect. This was then conjugated to form plus perfectum, which was anglicized to get pluperfect. Interestingly, there was no use of preteritum in deriving this word. To go one layer deeper, we need the Latin phrase for more than perfect. Let's try this. If we're reconstructing in Latin, we do not just stack the word plus sequentially. Instead, to intensify a comparative or indicate going beyond the beyond, Latin uses the prefix per. It roughly means thoroughly or utterly, and adding per to a word that is already at its limit creates a superlative above a superlative. If we're extending the Romans' own naming philosophy, rather than inventing something entirely new, we can do this. If we now conjugate like so, we get this. Finally, anglicizing, we obtain the word perpluperfect. Let's try using it in a sentence. Say a detective is reconstructing a crime. By the time the police arrived, there was no trace of the thief. The guard had discovered that someone unlocked the vault earlier that night, and the thief escaped after the guard found out this fact. The series of events I just described can be ordered in this manner. The sentence to be formed would therefore be something along the lines of, the detective discovered that the thief had escaped after the guard had realized that someone had unlocked the vault earlier that night. So far, we've been pretending that the superscript counts how far into the past an event is, but technically there's a little issue in saying that. If I were to replace the 3 here with a 17, let's say, what actually changes? Nothing, because we don't actually care about how much time gap 2 events have, only that time gap exists and is finite. So if we were to strictly bound every superscript to be minimized and sufficient, this would have to equal 3. If that idea feels strangely familiar, it should. Computer scientists encountered an almost identical problem decades ago. Lambda calculus. It is a formal logical system built for expressing computation. For instance, the following expression represents a function which takes some value x, adds 1 to it, and then evaluates that function at x equals 5. Things become interesting when you start nesting functions. Consider this expression. Here we have 2 nested scopes. If I were to remove the names x and y, then how could one possibly tell which variable is which? The thing is, we don't actually need their names. All we need to know is how many scopes we have to move outward to find where the variable was defined. So a valid notation for this would be the following. The 0 here refers to the variable belonging to the innermost scope, or y, and the 1 refers to the next scope outward, or x. These are called de Bruijn indices, and they are exactly what we've been doing with our temporal system. When we write carry PST say and then move into carry's temporal frame, we have entered a new scope. If another event establishes another reference point inside that frame, we've entered another scope. And another one gives us another scope still. Our superscript, therefore, is not really a measurement of elapsed time, but rather an index into a hierarchy of nested temporal scopes. And suddenly, that seemingly arbitrary rule we introduced earlier, that you can't just jump from PST3 to PST17, makes a lot more sense. There isn't a 17th temporal scope to refer to at all, just as a variable cannot refer to a 17th enclosing lambda when only 3 lambdas exist. An event cannot be assigned to a temporal layer that the discourse has never introduced. So, temporal grammar is just lambda calculus.